It's episode 75 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Thank you so much for joining me for this last year and a half for the Author Stories podcast. We've made 75 episodes now, and I'm super excited each week to bring the show to you. This is the end of 2015. There's one more show scheduled for the year, which is coming up next week, which is my year-end retrospective with my friend Chris Porto. So I hope you'll tune in for that. This is Christmas week, though, and from me and my family, I just want to extend a very warm Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of the listening audience. Thank you for joining me this year. This week, I've got an episode that I'm super excited about. I'm joined by Gene Yang, who is the writer of the monthly Superman comic. As you'll hear in the show, and as most of you have heard me talk about before, I have a great love of comics and comic characters that goes back to when I was a young child, and I can directly relate my reading and writing life to my love of comics. So thanks for joining me. Visit the links at hankgarner.com, and here's our interview with Gene Yang. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, as I record this interview, I'm sitting at my desk with my Superman t-shirt on, but that's really nothing out of the ordinary. That happens most days in my office. But I'm super excited today because joining me is Gene Yang, who happens to be the writer of DC's Superman comic. As a young person, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I've told this story many times, but I was a young person that struggled with dyslexia and was having a really hard time with reading and getting started in school. And my mother picked up a Superman comic, brought it to me, and it completely changed my life. And I know that's cliche and trite and all that, but it really did. From then on, I would find the spinner racks in the drugstores and convenience stores, and I then graduated to Justice League and Flash and Batman and all that. But Superman has always had a very special place in my heart, and because of that one Superman comic, I am now a voracious reader and a writer myself, and I get to bring you this podcast because of Superman in an offhanded kind of way. So being able to sit down with Gene Yang, the writer of Superman, is a great honor to me. And welcome to the show, Gene.
Oh, thank you, Hank. Thank you so much. The first comic that I bought was also a Superman comic. It was DC Comics Presents, but Superman was the lead feature. So he didn't get me into to reading in general, but he did definitely get me into collecting comics.
That's so awesome. Gene, I start every interview with a variation of the same question, and that question is, how did you first know that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I think I first knew I wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to get into stories. Both of my parents are immigrants. My mom was born in mainland China and my dad in Taiwan. And when we were growing up, one of the primary ways that I interacted with my parents was through storytelling. They were both avid storytellers, and my brother and I, we loved listening to their stories. Early on, stories were just very important in our family. So, as I got older, I drew all the way through. I was always interested in drawing ever since before I can remember. So as I got older, I realized, mostly through animation, but also through comics, that you can tell stories through drawing, and that's really what I wanted to do.
Excellent. And what was the first thing that you tried your hand at when you were you said you communicated with your parents, you shared storytelling with them, but what was the first thing that you put down on paper and said, I'm going to try to create this thing and try to tell a story for my friends or like that? How did that kind of grow and blossom in you?
Well, when I was in second grade, I used to keep this little notebook with just silly little writings and drawings in it. But I did start, I bought that Superman comic that I mentioned earlier when I was in fifth grade, and within just a few weeks, I actually started making comics. I had this friend named Jeremy in fifth grade, who was also a huge comic book fan, and we would just make comics together. We would come up with stories. I would do the pencils, he would do the inks. We would ask his mom to Xerox copy them for us at her work. And then we would take these Xerox copies, we'd staple them into books, and we'd sell them to our friends. That's how I got my start in comics. I didn't know this was the term for it at the time, but that was basically mini comics. Jeremy and I were producing mini comics when we were in 5th grade and selling them to our classmates.
Wow. Was the visual side of it always kind of front and center with you? Did some kids want to write an epic novel, some kids want to draw pictures, and like you said, create these comic style things? Did the visual aspect of it always was that always important with you?
Yeah, it's funny. I always saw myself as an artist when I was young. When I was really young, like when I was in early elementary school, I really wanted to be a Disney animator. I wanted to work on, animated feature films. And then after I got into comics in the 5th grade, I started, my idea of what I wanted my future to look like started shifting. And eventually what made me decide on comics over animation is the amount of control you have over the story. So really, ultimately, even though I was interested in drawing, I think I was primarily interested in drawing as a vehicle for story. So it's the underlying story that is most important, I think.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry about that. There's comics is one of those mediums that kind of gets some flack from people who would look down their nose at a less than serious endeavor. If you draw the pictures, you're minimizing the literary quality of the story. And I heard Stan Lee one time answer that, and he said, "Well, just because Shakespeare's words are so wonderful, you don't not put it on the stage. Adding a visual element does not detract from the quality of the writing." What do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually think that's true. I kind of think it's like almost like a cultural leftover from Europe that we have this bias against combining pictures with words. If you look at traditional Asian cultures like in China and Japan, words and pictures go together a lot. Like a Japanese print or a Chinese brush painting generally has words next to the image. They pair poetry with images, and the work is not considered complete unless both of those elements are there. The work is not considered masterful unless both of those elements are there. This is something that I've talked with my friend Gary Schmidt about. Do you know who Gary Schmidt is?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
Okay, so he's a novelist. He writes mostly middle grade fiction. He has gotten nominated for a Newbery Honor, and he got nominated for the National Book Award. Really successful storyteller. But
yeah.
We teach together at Hamlin University through the MFA program. So we were talking about this, and I wonder if here's the cockamamie theory that we discussed. I wonder if it dates back to the Protestant Reformation. So pre-Protestant Reformation, in Europe, they definitely paired words with images. There were illuminated manuscripts. If you go to old European churches, a lot of times the images in the windows or on the walls are actually in sequence. So they're actually telling you a narrative through the images, right?
Right.
And then post-Protestant Reformation, one of the ways in which the Protestants distinguished themselves from the Catholics was by excising images out of their forms of worship.
That's a fascinating
when
theory.
When you walk into a Protestant, like an old, not a modern, but when you walk into an old Protestant church, there's just no images anywhere, right? It's all music and it's all words. And then because America kind of we take our tradition out of the Protestant side of Europe.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's where that bias is, right? So when you have images and words together, it's kind of seen as like vulgar or for kids or not serious, and I wonder if that really dates back to the Protestant Europeans wanting to distinguish themselves from the Catholics.
That's a fascinating theory. I've never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. That merits some deep digging. That's great.
Yeah, that's just me. That's just me pulling something out. It's not really I don't have any sort of research to back that up or anything.
Yeah,
but
that's a great theory, though.
It was just out of a conversation with Gary. Yeah.
So 2006, you wrote a graphic novel called American-Born Chinese. Tell me about that.
It was kind of crazy. I started American-Born Chinese in 2000.
Okay.
And it started as a mini comic. I was basically publishing it in the same way that Jeremy and I were doing things when we were in the 5th grade. So I was drawing a chapter, I was printing it up at my local Kinko's, I was stapling them by hand, I was taking them to local comic book stores who were willing to sell it on consignment, or to local conventions where I'd sell it by hand. And at the end of the day, I'd do a print run of 50 to 100. I'd sell maybe a dozen or two of them at most. It was not a moneymaker at all. It was not a way I was supporting myself, but it was fun. It was really gratifying. And it took me, American-Born Chinese took me about 5 years to complete. So about 4 years in, I was done with most of the chapters. I think I finished 7 of the 9 chapters. A friend of mine named Derek Kim had recently gotten into contact with First Second Books, which was a subsidiary of Macmillan, and he made the introduction for me. He introduced me to Mark Siegel, who is the head editor at First Second Books. So I sent him my stuff. He liked my stuff enough to sign me up. Put out American-Born Chinese in 2006, and that was kind of a life-changing book for me. That was definitely a career-changing book.
Yeah.
It allowed me to go part-time at my day job. I was working as a full-time high school teacher at the time, and it allowed me to devote more of my time to making comics.
I love it. What's the story of American-Born Chinese?
American-Born Chinese, when I started that book, I'd done comics for a while. I'd been doing comics for maybe 5 years, and I'd always had these Asian American characters. Most of my protagonists were Asian American, but their cultural heritage never played a role in their story. It wasn't a huge factor in who they were, and because it is for me, me personally, my cultural heritage is a big deal. So I wanted to do some kind of a book where that was the focus. That's what American-Born Chinese was. I came up with these 3 different storylines. I couldn't decide which one I liked the best. And in the end, I chose to weave them together into a single narrative.
I love it. And I love the idea that you were creating this story and this art, even before you had a market for it or, an audience, that the passion for the medium and for the story was driving you, whether you were selling it or not. I think that's a lot of what a lot of new writers and things lack is that. I think a lot of people approach it that this is a job. This is what I'm going to do to make a living or whatever. But the missing piece is the passion. If you're doing it strictly because it's a job and you lack the passion, your readers are going to see that, and when the times are tough and you're not selling copies, you're going to want to walk away. How important to you is that passion, and how does that drive your daily work?
Well, I definitely think you need a passion for what you do, but I also think that it depends on how you define passion, but I think. If you're thinking of passion as a feeling, you're just going to run out.
Sure.
There's a very limited supply of that. No matter how intense it feels at the beginning, no matter how excited you are about your project at the beginning, sooner or later that passion is going to run out. So the way I think of my projects is kind of the way I think of my marriage. One of us has to be finished before it's over. So it's either I'm going to be done or that project's going to be done. But the relationship's not over until one of us is done. What I usually do is I will outline a project, and when I feel like that outline is solid, then I'll move on with it. So that outline is almost like the engagement period, right? You can still break things off at that point, and it's fine. But once you finish that outline and it's solid, you got to finish it all the way to the end. And I think what you want is that you want that initial passion that you feel to kind of solidify it to a habit, When I started making comics as an adult, I was living with a couple of college friends, none of whom were cartoonists. But I said to them one day, I said, I really want to make comics. I'm a little bit worried if I don't know if I have the discipline to finish the entire project. So what I want you to do is I want you to ask me at the end of every day how far I got in my project. If I didn't get far enough, I want you to make me feel bad about myself. And they were really good at that. They were awesome at making me feel bad about myself. So now I feel like I've internalized some of that, and that's kind of what allows me to finish my projects today.
That's great. You have another project that piqued my interest when I saw your website last night. Secret Coders. I was a computer nerd growing up in the '80s, and grew up with a TRS-80 computer and Commodore and some of the early Apple products. And my 11-year-old son has just developed a love of coding, and it's a completely different world for him than it was for me. But then I saw this project. Can you tell me a little bit about Secret Coders?
Yeah, sure. Do you remember what your first language was? Your first programming language?
BASIC was my first.
It was BASIC? Okay.
Yes.
Did you ever learn one called Logo?
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
Yes.
You remember that, right? Like with the little turtle?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was my first programming language. I learned that when I was in 5th grade. I learned it during the summer. My mom forced me to take this coding class for summer school. I was super mad about it at first, but then I grew to really love it. I thought it was awesome. And for those who don't know, Logo is this language that was designed for kids, and it's kind of art-based. There is this little turtle on the screen, and a lot of the language, not all of it, but a lot of language is about making that turtle create designs by giving it commands. So by doing this, by having the turtle draw, you are learning foundational concepts of computer science. That experience with Logo ignited an interest in me in coding that lasted me all the way through college. I ended up majoring in computer science. And then after graduating, I worked as a software developer for a couple of years before I started teaching high school. In high school, I taught, when I was teaching at that high school, I was teaching coding. I was teaching multiple levels. I was teaching an introductory class. I taught a graphics-based class, and then I also taught the AP class. When I was teaching, I always thought, I taught in this really visual way. I'd end up drawing a lot on my board, and I always thought, these lessons could translate really well into sequences of panels, into comics. So that's really what Secret Coders is. It's something I've thought about for a really long time, ever since I was teaching, about how to teach foundational computer concepts through comics. Both coding and comics are sequential in nature, so it's a really natural fit, at least in my mind.
Do you notice that that side of your brain that lends itself to coding and to the love of computer science? Do you feel that has any effect on your writing? I think a lot of people think
absolutely.
Those are two very different things.
I think there's a lot of overlap. I kind of think, in the modern world, there's this divide. Not everybody thinks this, but a lot of people think of this divide between the quote-unquote hard sciences and the quote-unquote, humanities. Right. But I think there's just a ton of overlap, and there are plenty of people who have interest in both. I would say most people have interest in both, and that divide is just totally artificial. Yeah. I see a lot of overlap between coding and making comics, and both you have to take complex ideas and break them into smaller pieces, and both you have to figure out a logical sequence to convey what you want to convey, and in both there's this debugging process. So in coding, you're basically going through multiple drafts of your code the same way you would go through multiple drafts of your story.
Yeah. Especially I guess around the early to mid '90s, there was this big, thing where people were labeling left brain and right brain activities, and certain people excelled at right brain things, and certain people excelled at left brain excelled. But I think that leads to stifling people's creativity, because none of us are all of one thing or all of another. So I love the idea that those things can overlap and can inform each other and can help in both of those areas.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, that's right. I really think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
everybody has both halves of their brains, right? And you don't want to be a person who doesn't use half of your brain.
That's right. That's right. We have enough of those in politics.
Good point.
So, and you've been from American-born Chinese. You then went on to write Avatar: The Last Airbender, and several other projects. You've written many short stories, but you also are a teacher. You talked about writing, teaching code, but you also are involved in this MFA program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The MFA program is it's a low residency program, so I mostly interact with my students online, and it's a pretty intimate program. I was first asked to guest speak there, and I liked it so much. When they asked me to join, I jumped. So once it's run out of Hamline University, which is in Minneapolis. I live in California. Once a year, I'll fly out there and spend maybe a week there. So everybody gathers, all the teachers and all the students gather a couple times a year, and then I'll get assigned anywhere from 1 to 3 students to work with on this. It's cool. It's really cool. It's sort of it allows me to get to know my students really well, since I only have 1 to 3 of them every semester, and I just learn a lot. I feel like I learn a lot by almost being forced to teach story. So like a lot of times when you're writing, you're writing out of an understanding of story that you've never articulated, and as soon as you say it, you understand it even better. So I feel like that's what I get out of the program. I learn a lot from my students. I learn a lot by being asked to teach certain concepts, and I learn a ton from just hanging out with other writers. There's some amazing writers who are on faculty there.
I love it. I love it. And one of the best ways to learn is by teaching. So I'm sure that being involved in this course, in this project, continues to spark your creativity as well.
Yeah, it really does. I think a lot of times people think of writing as this really lonely task, right? It's just you sitting in front of a computer or a typewriter and just going at it. And there's some days where it actually really looks like that. But I think every writer really needs some kind of a community. Otherwise, I just don't think you'll grow.
You're right. I completely agree. So starting with issue 41 of the current run of Superman, you came on as writer. Tell us how you got involved with Superman, the arguably one of the most iconic comic book characters, and surely one of DC's flagship characters. When you think comic books, there's a handful of things that characters that anyone in society will immediately be able to name off, and Superman, Batman are certainly two of those. And you've got Superman with a 75-year-old character, one of the cornerstones of DC Comics. How do you come to be the writer of this iconic book?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's I grew up loving superheroes. Most of the comics I read when I was a kid were superhero comics, and Superman is the character that kicked off the entire genre. Every other character, including Batman, every other superhero character, including Batman, is in some ways a derivative of Superman. They're like a play on ideas that Superman had established. There are just very few characters that are that popular and that powerful that they kick off their own genre. So to get to work on Superman, it was a huge thrill. It's also crazy intimidating. Sometimes I just feel super scared about it. But the way I'm not totally sure how it came about, to be honest. My agent is amazing. Her name is Judy Hansen. She had a meeting of some kind with the folks at DC, and this is what came out. She just called me up. She goes, would you be interested in writing Superman? And I was like, yes. And that's how it happened.
Oh, that's so cool. What when you came onto the book? Well, for those that may not be up to speed, about 4 years ago, DC rebooted their entire line, called it the New 52, and started all of their books back at issue number one. And all of their characters went through some changes and kind of an update on everyone. When you came in at issue 41, were you given any specific task? Okay, this is where we're moving the character, but how much creative license were you given with Superman?
Well, we were asked. So I kind of joined the team, right? Superman is popular enough that he is in 4 different books. He's in Superman, which I'm writing. He's in Action Comics, which is written by a guy named Greg Pak, and he's actually now writing with the artist on the book, Aaron Cooter. He's in Superman Wonder Woman, which is written by Pete Tomasi, and then Batman Superman, which is also written by Greg Pak. So I was basically invited onto this team, and as a team, we were asked to create a brand new reality for Superman. DC was going to do this initiative called DCU, which happened this past summer, where they're going to introduce some pretty dramatic changes into their universe without rebooting. So, like, Batman gets amnesia, and Jim Gordon becomes the new Batman. And for Superman, what we came up with was we wanted to back up his power set back to what he had in 1938 when he first came into the world. So back then, he was very strong, and he was very hard to kill, but he couldn't fly, he didn't have X-ray vision, he didn't have heat vision. We wanted to back him up to that. And then we also wanted to take away his secret identity. So it was kind of a combination of old and new, right? His power set would be really old, but then, in the modern world, how likely is it for somebody to be able to hold on to a secret identity? In the age of information, how can you do that? So we're going to reveal him to the world, and that would be his new reality. Everybody would know he was Clark Kent, and his power set would be diminished.
And when you revealed that secret identity, I literally gasped, when I read that, because it's so hard nowadays that so many storylines get spoiled in the news before you even have a chance to read the comic. They'll for whatever reason, you'll see, Superman loses his secret identity next month, but then when you read the way that you went about doing that reveal, you made it so personal, so gut-wrenching, because, spoilers, Lois reveals his secret identity, but did it out of a desire to protect Clark, that, if this enemy is holding all that he holds dear over his head, the only way to disarm that is to take that away from him. But then that opens up all sorts of interpersonal problems between Clark and Lois and then everyone around him. What was your thought process when you decided to do that, and how you brought that out?
Yeah, I mean, so we had decided at some point that Lois would be the one to reveal, and it was just something that was difficult for me to wrap my head around, because she's a really iconic character. She her moral compass is very strong,
right?
And it just it took some thinking, to figure out how I'd want to do it in a way that didn't feel like it was betraying anything about Lois that had already been established. So I don't know. I hope I did okay, but I don't know. It was hard. I feel like it was hard, but it was also I feel like I had a lot of help. I had my editor Eddie Braganza to bounce things off of. I was able to talk to the other writers about it, and that's kind of what I came up with was doing it that way.
Well, I would imagine it was hard, because reading it was hard, in that you really felt the gut-wrenching kind of nature of the decision and the fallout of that. So it was obviously not taken lightly. You could tell that it was really handled with care and with a lot of thought put in.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely thought a lot about it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Another thing,
Lois and Clark were on my mind for a long time, for hours.
I'll bet.
Every day for hours.
I'll bet. Another thing I noticed about your run is that it very much with those things that came out and the decisions that have been made, it very much has become more than a Superman book in that, like you talked about Lois being that iconic character. You really gave some agency to Lois, and not that she didn't already, but she. The focus turned toward her. The focus has turned to Jimmy. It's really become a book about Superman's humanity, and which is odd to say when you think about him being an alien, but his humanity and the people surrounding him and his relationships, and that's one thing I'm loving about your run is how you're really pulling all those aspects together and not just showing the big blue Boy Scout, but all of the things that make him who he is.
Well, thank you. I mean, I love his supporting cast. I think every iconic character has to have an iconic supporting cast behind it, right? And especially his relationship with Jimmy. I think out of all the aspects of Superman, that was probably the easiest for me to write. Simply because I have relationships that are like that. I have, friends that you kind of just talk about stupid things with, but then when push comes to shove, you're there for each other. So that felt really familiar to me and really easy.
Yeah. When you're dealing with a character with such a history, a backlog of story, and one that is one of the cornerstones of a brand, like Superman is the weight of all of that, does that become stifling sometimes when you think, oh God, what if I screw up Superman? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, I wasn't actually so much worried about screwing up Superman because he's a resilient character, right? Even if I screw him up, you can back him back. You can put him back. And second is that he's really, like, if you look at his history, I read this book by this guy named Glenn Weldon. He's a host on NPR. He wrote this book called Superman, the Unauthorized Biography. So as soon as I signed up to do Superman, I read this book, which gives like this huge overview of his entire history. And he has just gone through lots of different eras, lots of different iterations. His personality's changed. His moral code has changed. A lot about him has changed, We think of Superman as this one static character, but he's really not. He is pretty flexible. So I wasn't so much worried about that. It was more about, there's just something intimidating about being a superhero fan and then finally getting to work for one of the big two, and especially to work for, the one superhero, the character that kicked off the genre. It's just, that part was just super intimidating. But I wasn't totally worried about screwing him up. I just thought, he's so flexible. He will be here long after I'm gone, so it doesn't really. Yeah, that wasn't so much of a concern.
What is it about the character that you love the most of Superman?
Well, the piece of him that resonates with me the most is that he is the ultimate immigrant, right? His creators were both the children of Jewish immigrants. And I don't know if they did this on purpose or not, but they really put a lot of their story into him. He has these two different identities. He's from a foreign place. And like a lot of Jews at the time of his creation, he was able to pass in some ways, like Superman's able to pass in some ways in mainstream society. But then deep down, he knows he's different. All of those things, I think, resonated with me as a child of immigrants.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that with your first book, American Born Chinese, it seems like Superman is the perfect immigrant story, and I think a lot of people have resonated with that story over the years for that very reason, and for the outsider assimilating into society and and that whole thing. Have you gotten feedback from people since you've taken up the book, and how are people receiving what you're doing?
Yeah, I've gotten some feedback. Some people, I guess it's the same as anything else I do, right? So some people really like it, and some people don't. But the folks who like it, I think it seems like they, first they understand the flexibility of the character. They understand that, even though we took away the cape and we took away the stick curl, that he's flexible enough to take it. That as a character, he's strong enough to take that kind of stuff, and that's fine. And second is that they, I think a lot of them are coming from the same perspective on Superman as I am. Like the part of his character that attracts them the most is the fact that he's an immigrant.
Yeah. As a comic writer, and then coming into DC and working with a team, what is the creative process like with the creative process between the writer and the illustrator, and how does that process work?
It depends. It depends. I think so far I've gotten to work with 2 illustrators on Superman. They are both phenomenal, but also very different, both as artists and as people. The first artist that I got to work with was John Romita Jr., who I've been a fan of since I was a kid. He doesn't like it when I say that, because he says it makes him feel old. But I mean, he's like, people consider John Romita Jr. a legend for a reason. He's just an amazing artist. He really pushed the medium and the genre forward with his work. And for him, what I learned was he is like, if he didn't become a superhero cartoonist, he would have been like a fight choreographer for movies or something like that. He's just phenomenal at orchestrating action. So what I learned with him is that I, like in my scripts, I just let him cut loose. There are certain parts where he just doesn't need a ton of direction from the script, and he just needs elbow room to do what he does best. For Howard Porter, who I've been working with more recently, he came on with issue number 45, and I've been a fan of his as well ever since he did JLA with Grant Morrison. He and I worked together a little bit more closely. He wanted the scripts to be a little tighter for me to add a little bit more direction in there. But then at the same time, he says that, but he is able to take what I write and just take it up to the next level. Like he puts little in-jokes in there that are awesome. Like he put Stan Lee as the employee of the month in a burger joint. I thought that was hilarious. That was all him. And then in terms of the action as well, he's able to draw the action from angles that I just do not have the capacity of imagining. Both of them are just, they're really, really good at their jobs. They're really, really good at drawing superhero comics, and it really shows.
That's awesome. And I can assume that when you kind of feel the kind of work out the beats with an artist, that do you start kind of playing off each other? Do you get feedback from the artist ever that then shapes the direction of a story? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Like with with Howard, I'll ask him like what he likes to draw, and I'll try to push things in that direction. John, I asked him the same question, and I think he's just good at drawing everything. So he never gave me a straight answer. It was more. I think for John, he's what he's really good at is action, right? He's amazing at action. So I just needed to give him some elbow room with the action sequences.
When you're writing, since you are an artist, when you're writing out a script, do you ever kind of sketch out a scene? Does that help you kind of figure out the shape of the story or the action?
Yeah, sometimes I will. I'll do thumbnail sketches for some of the scenes. For my own stuff, I write the thumbnails. When I'm doing the writing or when I'm doing the drawing, my scripts look like thumbnail sketches of every page. But then when I'm writing for like a licensed character, like the Avatar stuff or the Superman stuff, what I turn in kind of looks like a movie script. It's only words.
Gotcha. I've noticed on the DC website, the next I guess about 3 issues are got thumbnails there of coming soon. How far do you have the story written down the road?
Well, we sat down early on to outline the whole thing, outline the entire arc, which ends at 50. We sat down as a Superman team in the old New York offices early on in the year. I don't remember, January maybe, and then we just did an overall like pretty rough outline. So we've had that all the way through, and then now I'm a few issues ahead.
Nice. So, Gene, as we wrap up, is there anything you can tell us about where Superman's going and what we can expect without spoiling the story?
Well, this current storyline is all about Superman losing almost everything that we think of as defining who he is. So he loses a lot of his strength. He loses a lot of what makes him iconic. His cape and his curl, his boots, his bright red boots, and all he's left with is the S. And even that S is not his current S. It's this old Fleischer era S. We're trying to visually show that he's been kind of stripped bare, and we wanted to do that to show who he is at the core.
Right.
He's going to hit that core. He hits that core in all the different books, right? All the different Superman books. But in the one that I'm writing, he hits that core in the issue that'll be coming out next week, issue number 47. He'll hit the bottom, and then at that point, he has nowhere to go but up.
Love it. Gene, I love what you're doing on Superman. I love what you're doing everywhere else. And thank you for taking time to come on the show. Can you tell everyone where they can follow you and
Sure.
keep up with your work?
Sure. So I have a website. It's at GeneLuenyang.com, GeneLuenyang. I'm at that same handle on Twitter and on Facebook.
Awesome.
It's just my full name spelled out, no spaces.
Gotcha. And you can, of course, pick up your run on Superman at your favorite bookstore or comic shop, on Amazon, on Comixology, and the DC app for digital comics. And I would definitely recommend everyone pick up Superman, especially with issue 41 and going forward where Gene is writing. Thank you so much, Gene, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Hank. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it, too.